Hey everybody, and welcome to the first video of kind of the behind the scenes. This is going to be on my very first mod that I ever made. This is on BetterWards. So for some of you who might not know, if you want to download BetterWards, again, go to valheimthunderstore.io. You can search my name and you can find a list of every mod that I've ever had. You can also just type in BetterWards and it'll be the first one here. Last updated 4 months ago. It will be getting an update for the 0.216.5 version of Valheim, which is currently in public test. So whenever they release that, you can expect an update on this, but the video will come out before. So you can click here, join the Discord, kind of see different things about how I set it up, support me, what it requires, and kind of all of the update information. So this being my first mod that I worked on, this was something that a lot of people wanted, but didn't realize that they wanted. The stuff that I made for this mod, and the reason why I made this mod, was it spawned out of necessity. I started out in Valheim very, very early, ended up being a server owner very early, and my server was a PvP server, or we at least attempted. At the time, we didn't know anything about Valheim. We didn't know anything about the code. We didn't know anything about anything, really. So in a PvP server, very early days, it was easy to cheat. It was easy to find exploits in the game, the stuff that the devs didn't even think of yet, and things like that. It is a beta game, still is to this day, like 2.5 years later. But my server was a PvP server. We thought very early on that the wards were the protect all. I've got a ward for my base finally. It protects my stuff. It locks my doors. It locks my chests. But we didn't realize that the game's client authoritative. We didn't realize that that's all the ward did. It didn't do anything extra. It didn't do anything cool. So we're going to dive into this and kind of sit around and talk about some of the things that popped up, some of the necessities, some of the patches, and the reason why BetterWards became a thing. So hope you guys enjoy. So the first two videos that you'll see is me testing out the health, the specific health feature of adding health to the player. Initially, as you can see here, I added to the max health when you enter the ward radius, which is defined by this dotted line. This was me testing it on my server at the time, where that was the PvP server that everybody wanted to play on. A lot of these things, again, did spawn out of necessity. So I was just testing this feature. The health adding to max turned out to not be the best approach. So we're going to move to this video here, where I actually test adding to the player's health rather than the max health to heal them over time versus actually adding to the total health pool. That way people actually get the benefit of, if they're hurt and they can make it home, they heal themselves. So I tested with a fire. The fire does constant damage. I've got it set to heal me at 1,000. Obviously, this was not the eventual value, but you can tweak that in BetterWards. I did also very similar thing in Ward is Love as well. But when you leave the ward, you can see that, as I take damage on this fire, I'm not really healing, but it's doing a lot less damage. I'm not healing, and I'm taking more and more damage over time. But if I go into the ward, I instantly heal. So it was a pretty cool feature to mess around with. The next one here is with my lovely admin helper, Loxy. We were testing the damage of the ward, damage to creatures, damage to players. It turns out if you do damage to your player in a large sense, you'll have a lot of problems. But speaking of damage here, we're testing the damage reduction. So as the ward turns on, you can see that 15 now turns to a 3. So again, one of the things that eventually was tweakable. Then here, I pick some flax. I'm able to pick it up. I go inside of a ward that I'm not permitted on. I try to do the exact same thing, and I get denied. So on the carrot seeds, can't pick it up. Tested this on things like item stands. In this case, the Surtling cores. Still can't pick it up. Can't pick up the dragon eggs. Can't pick up the swords. trying to prevent the players on any different method that they try to steal your items. And then here, again, my lovely Loxy admin, we were testing the push out feature. This one ended up being pretty funny because the push out feature didn't used to push you out on a whole 360-degree radius. It used to do exactly what you see here, is you enter it on one side and it would spam you and push you out to the other. And if you notice in the top left, I've got the "you are not permitted on this ward" being spammed to me as well. So that was one of the bugs. But it ended up being something that we worked out in the end, but it did take a ton of testing to get that calculation correct. I had to constantly calculate and make sure that you were not able to enter the ward. Then Loxy, who left Valheim eventually, I started having to test a lot of things by myself. In this case, I was testing the portals. So making sure that you can't use portals that you don't have access to, making sure that they don't light up, they don't even give you the indication that you can use them. And then in this one outside of the ward here, was the one that we saw with Loxy. Here I was testing the bubbles, trying to get those and trying to understand those. I couldn't understand why we couldn't see the back side of the bubble initially, And then, as you can see, I left the ward, but significantly far away from the bubble. I was trying to figure out how to make those match. Took a lot of time. I eventually started to figure stuff like that out. So I started to mess with the size of the bubble. How big can I make it? How big can it go before it disappears? What does it look like bigger than it is? Does it start to stretch, look funky, and things like that? So I've got a ton of these videos, random things of me testing. As you can see, the size doesn't match up with the bubble anymore still, but I did eventually figure that out. So, and then here we are testing kind of the offline, the monster AI of being ignored. The message on the screen, again, was for pure testing purposes, making sure that it was working. But I also wanted to test damage a little bit further. I wanted to make sure, hey, I'm not permitted. You can see the owner is Thor, permitted is test. This current character is not. So I'm doing millions and millions of damage. I'm not able to break anything. I can see the numbers. I can see what damage I would be doing, but it's not actually happening. In this case, I just typed in the permit command to permit myself on the ward, which now means I can do damage to things that I own or am allowed to do damage to. So a lot of testing. Sword I'm using here is the Ashbringer, which may or may not be maintained anymore, but really cool sword. Here we are with another video. Again, Loxy had left Valheim, but we tested this a lot in this area here. We were testing the admin auto perm, which is I'm not permitted here, and then as I turn it on, I instantly get permitted, and then I unpermit and do the same thing and cut it back on. So a lot of different testing, a lot of different things were happening to accomplish this mod and make sure that all the features that you guys wanted were working in proper fashion. So hours and hours of testing, but it ended up being worth it, I think. So now we're going to kind of see the code that accomplished a lot of BetterWards. It's very similar to Ward is Love code, which is public. BetterWards code is not public. Not for any particular reason necessarily, other than the fact that it's just absolute garbage. It was the first mod that I ever made, so harmony patching was new to me. I did a lot of redundant things. I did a lot of things that were not exactly considered to be best practice. But in this case, this is a fairly decent patch, so to speak, because I specified a prefix and then I said, hey, a patch, and I'm patching this class of that prefix. So this one was one of the things that a lot of people asked for. It's the auto pickup feature. People didn't want someone to run into their ward and then, the auto pickup feature suddenly suck it up into their inventory if it happened to be on the ground from like a smelter or from a kiln. So as of Mistlands, they added things with factions. So this is kind of new. Initially, this used to be like private area is in area or something like that. I forget the exact method. Private area is the mono behavior or the component, in other words, that is attached to wards. So I created this kind of method here. If you return false on a prefix, it prevents the original method, which in this case is in the player class called auto pickup. it prevents that original code from running. So prefixes happen before this, postfix happens after this. And transpilers are things that if you need to modify it, the IL code or the code instructions directly, you would use those. So the chat window initially, this is still kind of crappy code. They moved the chat functionality over to the terminal class and made it a lot easier. So we're not explicitly checking strings like this. But this is basically the commands. I set up all my commands here. I made sure that you could do permit, unpermit, flash, destroy, enable, disable, all that from like the console effectively. So when you type it in, I said, case destroy for each physics overlap sphere, find the private areas, aka the wards, determine if you're the creator or not creator, so on and so forth. Are you an admin? Blah, 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 blah. And then let you know that something happened in the console window. Same thing with Flash, same thing with different things. So more or less the same thing as what Ward is Love has, but BetterWards, obviously. I did it very bare bones. I did it very simplistic. And here's where I said some of the code is kind of crappy. So naming it a postfix and then giving it the attribute of postfix is redundant. Same thing with the patch and then the patch here. You don't have to do it that way. The initial example for the auto pickup is the best way to do it. At least in my opinion. You can be redundant if you want. So this one here is creature damage. We wanted to make sure that if they were inside of the faction area that your damage increase, which in this case was the amount of damage that you do to the characters, is increased based off of your value and of course divided and calculated by 100. So it's then added to 1. So it is a percentage increase on the base value. So fairly simple patch here. And then destroyed ward. This is what I needed to eventually patch to destroy the trader bubble that we saw in the previous videos. This needed to effectively destroy that and destroy the effect area, which was like the no monster area. Needed to make sure that that was destroyed. This kind of causes issues in some cases, so I put a try catch around it. And the catch is ignored. This is not advised. It's easy it's easy to do stuff like that. It's easy to say, try this. If you fail, I don't really care. When really, in reality, for performance reasons and for a lot of different reasons, you should probably see what that issue is. Because this mod spawned out of necessity, it was people wanted the mod right then. They wanted the features right then, right there, right now. It was fast. I had, again, my own server, of which I was the server owner, and people were asking all of this fairly rapidly, and I was losing players the longer it took me to code things. So I would code it, I would test it, I would get it to work, and then I didn't really care how the code looked because at the time it was for just my server. So doors, people wanted to be able to auto close their doors whenever they left a ward, or if they left their base in general, or they're inside of their base, they open a door, they want it to close 5 seconds later or 2 seconds later. Fireplace Unlimited, same thing. They wanted a lot of QOL things. They wanted things that were, let things auto fuel for me. Let it stay at max fuel if it's inside of my ward. I don't want to have to constantly fill it up. I don't want to have to constantly go out and grab resources. So a lot of people tend to ask for things that are meant to really speed up the game, but in turn sometimes actually causes the game to not be fun anymore. So again, stupid double postfix. I was not very smart back then on harmony patching, but this one here was the health stuff that we saw. I eventually, did a base health boost on how much it's actually healing the player over time. Interactions, we saw that in action. Item stands, teleport world is portals. Pickables, which is like the flax in the video. Item drops is like the sword that was on the ground. Ships, crafting stations, smelters. Smelters can be kilns, hot tubs, or actual smelters, or what you would think is a smelter. So all of them use the same component. And then I've commented this out. I did localization manually a long time ago. I did things where I said, this is the key that I want to localize into English. Eventually, I switched to the localization manager, which allows me to specify a big file type and then what the keys are and what the values are, and then allows people to actually customize it themselves. So this code became not needed. I actually commented it out instead of removing it because I didn't know if I'd never need it again. Monster AI, this one was, people having issues where you would enter a ward, your team would stop following you because they use the same monster AI component as the actual monsters that are trying to follow you to aka kill you. So I had to do a transpiler. I had to go into the IL code, the code instructions themselves, and basically remove and replace and say, hey, I want you to run my code instead of that. So this one was a very helpful patch. This was the first transpiler I ever had help writing. I did not write it myself. I actually had help writing this one from Blackson. So she taught me transpilers, which is why I'm halfway decent at them now. Skill on death, people when they died inside their wards. Again, here's another transpiler. Lovely. When people died inside of their wards, they didn't want to lose their stuff. They didn't want to lose their food. They didn't want to lose their items. All of that. This is basically just checking, are you inside of a ward? And is this setting turned on? If so, do this. If not, do this. This is actually slightly rewritten, specifically because the 0.216.5 patch that is in public test right now required me to rewrite this. So this is actually updated code. So you guys are seeing that before anybody else. No food drain. If they're inside of a ward, they simply just didn't want their food to drain, right? They didn't want to lose their food buff. No teleport, exactly what you think it is. They can't use your portals. They're not going to be able to teleport in and out. And if their item says that they can't teleport, suddenly they can, vice versa. Offline rating. People didn't want their stuff destroyed. This took a ton of testing, even though it's 145 lines. It took a ton of testing. It took a lot of messing around with things to get things right. Push out, we saw that in the video, but this is kind of that code. All it is in its simplicity is it's getting the radius of the ward. It's saying, is it one of my wards or is it a default guardstone? And you're not permitted. If you're not permitted, it's going to take that player's position and it's going to move it to somewhere outside of the ward, which is usually immediately outside of the ward because the player's going to obviously try to run back in. PvP, again, I didn't know the best things of code. Running things in update, the method in update of player, that is a mono behavior. Player is mono behavior, which has a Unity event function called update. Update runs every single frame. So it's running this chunk of code every single frame. Same thing with every single frame on game update. It's not very performant, but luckily the code itself is, although it's a lot of lines, it is fairly lightweight. So it runs these calculations very quickly. And turns out this actually didn't really impact performance. You may or may not lose one frame here or there, but you usually gain it back pretty quick. So without really going through the rest of the code a whole bunch and just kind of narrowing things down, initially, everything that you guys may or may not be familiar with BetterWards was all coded. It was all split out into different classes. I had a folder called patch classes. I had a folder called server. And in this case, here's my version handshake. I made sure that my server patch is here. I'm registering all my RPCs that I wanted to be sent to and from the client and to and from the server, vice versa. So the client system, how they're accepting those RPCs, what it looks like on their end. And then the same thing with the server admin system, what it looks like on their end, what's being sent, what values and stuff we're grabbing. So this get socket get host name is actually getting your Steam ID, even though I've got it in here as like string, but it's your Steam ID. And the introduction of crossplay, obviously I need to change this a little bit. I need to make sure that that's different. I'll probably never do that for BetterWards, but I will most likely do that for Ward is Love because that was meant to be the successor of this mod. Ward damage, this is the periodic damage to things that get hit inside of the ward, whether it's the lightning ward or the poison ward, aka the green or the blues, stuff like that. So BetterWards, initially, when I first wrote it, everything was very manual in the sense. Eventually, I moved BetterWards over to my piece manager so I could just define a little piece and say, hey, I want it in this hammer, I want it in this crafting station, require these things of these amounts, and whether or not you can recover them or not when the ward is destroyed. that ended up speeding a lot of things up. It also caused a lot of problems because BetterWards at the time also changed a lot of things about the default ward. So I had to make sure that anything that I made customizable with the new Piece Manager edition and things like that, that I also made customizable with the default ward, which turned out to be a pain in the butt. It was almost a complete rewrite of some of the logic. So, but in the end, it worked out pretty well. Here's my delay repair coroutine. This is going to slowly heal your stuff over time. But as we go through this, really all the configuration entries, you can see you're going from line 228 to 287. So you got about 60 something configurations plus, and that's just the ones that are defined in this class. But this mod was my first mod. The code is still kind of meh, but you guys have seen a little bit of the journey, where I went, how I coded things, and what it took to actually code things. There's a ton of code in this mod. If you guys have any additional questions or you want me to make a second video that goes in detail on the code, I will. But hopefully you enjoyed a little bit of the behind the scenes, and hopefully everything's up to your standards. I love you guys very much. Thank you so much for supporting me, and I'll see you in the next video.